I, you, we, us. There are now 8 billion, 8,000 million of us living on every nook and corner of this one precious earth. Unlike monkeys and apes, our ancestors in the story of the evolution of man, over 1 million years or more, we have now evolved into one large global village, enveloped by an immense worldwide web. With 1 million different and intricate strands, we are all woven together in one grand tapestry, celebrating the eternal tree of life. On this tree of life, in this newly minted global village, in 1,000 known and unknown ways, we are all unique. We are all individuals. There are 8,000 million of us. There is only one earth, but there are 8,000 million worlds. Each one of us has a world of our own in our hearts and minds, of memories, of hopes, of dreams, of disappointments, of skirmishes, of hurts, of pain, of suffering, of longings, of desires, some fulfilled, many unfulfilled. We are individuals, each one of us, but we are also indivisible. It is one large global village inhabited by people of many different sects, religions, cultures, languages, histories, beliefs, longings, and many different skirmishes and hurts. 2,000 years ago, in the beginning of the Christian era, we were less than 3% in number, about 250 million. Our Mother Earth has not changed in size one bit, but we humans have increased in numbers dramatically. And our needs and demands and our interactions with each other and our interdependencies on each other have grown exponentially. 2,000 years ago, blatant struggles for sheer survival. Perhaps many of us believed in the inevitability of hunger, of wars, of death, as depicted so graphically by the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse in the book of Revelation in the Bible. Conquest, war, famine, death. Today, from behind every wall, under every stone, everywhere, more than ever before, every nation, every clan, every family, everyone is being called upon to imagine and invoke a different set of horsemen, not of apocalypse, but of hope. These horsemen of hope must be the angels of oneness, of mercy, of peace, and of forgiveness. These angels celebrate not the sordid morbidity of death, but the fruition of life. It is thus that I share with you why and how, in the immense journey of man for our true evolution as sentient beings, ushering an age of forgiveness is essential and inevitable. We are all individuals, we know. Yet again and again, even in the midst of wars and skirmishes, we realize that we find our full fruition with each other and in each other, in our families, in our clans, in our communities, in our nations, in our temples, and in our churches, in our common history, in our stories, in our myths, in our symbols, in our icons. Africans say Ubuntu. I am because you are. This is the idea of brotherhood and sisterhood. The Zulu phrase Umuntu Negamutu Nagambutu literally means that a person is a person through other people. This is at the root of philosophy of humanism, even at the root of the idea of crime against humanity. In 1956, even in the midst of sordid Cold War, in celebration of an exhibition of photographs, Family of Man, which shows photographs of human life from around the world, at the Museum of Modern Art in New York, American poet Carl Sandburg sang, "There is only one man in the world, and his name is all men. There is only one woman in the world, and her name is all women. There is only one child in the world, and the child's name is all children. Vasudev Kutambakam, the whole world is a family," declared the seers and sages in India over 2,000 years ago. Kabira kuan ek hai, pani bharai anek, bhanda hi mein bhed hai, pani sab mein ek. From one great well, we draw the same sustenance, many different vessels, but the water within us all is the same. In the story of man, sadly, for every whisper and invocation for oneness, for peace, for unity, for brothering, there have been and continue to be 1,000 cries for othering, for distrust, for strife, for revenge, for wars, for conquest. I wonder if this sagar manthan, a churning of the ocean for some amrita, some elixir of immortality, the endless struggle between the devas and the asuras, between the angels and the demons, is really a story of a battle between the forces of brothering on one hand and of othering on the other. Brothering and othering. It is thus that I speak of the yoga of forgiveness as an essential tool for sagar manthan, for the churning of the ocean, for some amrita, some nectar, a certain panacea for our survival. What is hurt, we may ask? What is it that makes us suffer? Physical pain we understand, and we have learnt much to deal with it in all its various manifestations. But emotional pain and the suffering it triggers eludes us still, again and again. How and why does an emotional hurt make us suffer? Pain, it is said, may be inevitable, but suffering is optional. There is a way out of that suffering. This is what is the very core of yoga forgiveness. I call it yoga, for the path of yoga, as Hatha Yoga, Sahaja Yoga, Jnana Yoga, Raj Yoga, is to strive to create harmony, a certain peace, not only between the various limbs of our body, but also in our hearts and minds, with the times gone by and the times to be, between the past and the future, between what may have been and what could be, between despair and hope. All problems of existence are essentially problems of harmony, Sri Aurobindo wrote in Synthesis of Yoga. How to create harmony so we are at peace with ourselves, with each other, in the family, in our neighborhoods, in our communities and institutions, in our countries, in harmony with Mother Earth at large, indeed in harmony with the whole cosmos, with the grand, mysterious universe and its exuberant splendor. This is the heart of yoga forgiveness. Seeking harmony with ourselves and with each other in our global village of 8 billion hurt and disgruntled human beings through the yoga forgiveness. And through other yogas, I believe, is the real calling of our spiritual journey here on this earth, for each one of us. Now, in our global village of 8 billion Homo sapiens, the so-called wise ones. At a time when we are more connected with each other than ever before, for our own survival and for the survival of our sacred Mother Earth, for human unity and brothering to usher in all of us, all over the world, must learn and practice the yoga of forgiveness to heal ourselves and to heal others. Can we have the courage to acknowledge the pain and suffering, real or perceived, that we have caused others, sometimes recently, sometimes long ago, sometimes over decades and centuries, often wantonly, often blatantly. Just very recently, on July 1, the King of Netherlands, William Alexander, expressed apology and asked for forgiveness for the role Netherlands has played as an imperial power in slave trade in its former colonies, affecting more than 600,000 people over a period of 250 years. Humiliation of 600,000 people of a different race, a different religion, a different culture, experienced over 250 years, seething in the memory of each person and in generation after generation, in some collective unconscious, waiting to be acknowledged and cleansed and hoping to be redeemed. Then again recently, on the first day of Eid al-Adha, one of the most important festivals in the Muslim calendar, one person in Sweden set fire to a copy of the Quran, Islam's holy book, outside of Stockholm's central mosque. Out of a certain rage and anger, for whatever reason, such an act was meant to insult and hurt the Muslims. Indeed, Muslims in many countries felt deeply hurt and angry, as they have time and again, at least since 1989, when Salman Rushdie's book, The Satanic Verse, and later cartoons and caricatures of Prophet Muhammad in newspapers and magazines triggered violence and retaliation in many countries, resulting in the death of hundreds of people on all sides, and more hurt and more anger in hundreds of millions of Muslims in scores of countries. Under the pretext of freedom of expression, Muslims argued and protested worldwide that such anti-Islamic actions are repugnant and unacceptable. So, more mayhem, more destruction, more distrust, more hurt. President Erdogan of Turkey declared, "We will teach the arrogant Westerns that insulting Muslims is not freedom of thought." How will they teach? Retaliation? More violence? More destruction? How would anyone learn if they refuse to learn it? Freedom to offend by words, by gestures, by certain acts, by burning a holy book, a flag, a temple, a gurudwara. What is the way out? Do we care to find a way out? Are values of courtesy, respect, sensitivity towards others foolish, outmoded notions? What is freedom of expression? Asks American cultural historian Susan Sontag rhetorically. Without the freedom to offend, it ceases to exist. Really? In July 22, a year ago, the Pope Francis expressed profound apologies to Canada's Indigenous communities for the abuse, both physical and sexual, of their children in church-run as residential schools where unmarked graves of hundreds of children have recently been discovered. With shame and unambiguously, Pope Francis said, "I humbly beg forgiveness for the evil committed by so many Christians against the Indigenous people of Canada. Over a period of 100 years, until 1996, more than 150,000 native children, known at the time as Indian children, some as young as 3 years, were removed from their homes and their families and segregated in residential schools for the purpose of solving the Indian question by taking the Indian out of the Indian, that is, attempting to convert the indigenous savages into civilized humans. For this cultural genocide, in 2008 and again in 2017, 2 Prime Ministers of Canada offered apology and solicited forgiveness for this sad chapter in Canada's history. These are 3 recent illustrations that I mentioned out of thousands in our human history, in every corner of the world, of pain and suffering of a group of people, the slaves in the Dutch colonies, the indigenous populations of Canada, the Muslims all over the world, some acknowledgement of the pain of others and some attempt at cleansing it, or pertinaciously refusing to acknowledge it, all in the name of freedom of expression. History of every country is full of similar hurts. November 11 is celebrated as the Remembrance Day in many countries. It is the day in 1918 on which the most brutal war in the human history until then had finally come to an end after 4 years of barbaric savagery that had killed millions of people, including 74,000 soldiers from India, who were among 1.2 million young men who had been enlisted to fight for the British Empire. I think sometimes far more important than remembering is to learning to forget. For the sake of life to go on, there should be a day to forget and forgive. On May 26 every year, Australia observes National Sorry Day to commemorate the stolen generations of Aboriginal children who were forcibly separated from their families. What good is history? One may wonder. I sometimes think that history teaches us the need and importance of forgetting. It tells us what may be remembered, but more importantly, what must be forgotten and forgiven. This is true, I believe, of one's own personal history, as of our family, our community, our nation, and of the world at large. And then there are times when, for some, memory of the past is so bitter that they yearn to forget and obliterate any reference to it. Those who survived the agony of the Holocaust for years were so numbed into silence. The victims of the partition of India on both sides of the divide found nothing redeeming in remembering and retelling its horrors. When talking about the problem of dementia and Alzheimer's disease that afflicts so many elderly people, one woman in her 80s once remarked to me, "My problem is not dementia," she said, "I want to learn how to forget." Decades earlier, she was a victim of family violence over many years. She did not know, as most of us don't know, how to make the past and prepare ourselves to receive the present of the present. Which teacher, what school ever teaches us how to learn to live with our own personal history, our own hurts, our own very private suffering? Certain gestures, certain actions, certain words uttered casually or recklessly, uttered by a teacher, by a brother, by a father, by a mother-in-law, by anybody, they can hurt and hurt for a long time. As they twist and turn in our memory, sometimes for a day or two, sometimes for a month or a year, sometimes for a decade, They can make us squirm and suffer again and again, destroying our peace of mind, our lives. Words uttered against us personally, the way we look, our lack of intelligence, our ways of being and doing. You are lazy, you are stupid, you are a cheat, you will amount to nothing, you will be forever a failure, you are a born loser. Incredibly, even those who later came to be celebrated as great scientists or musicians or statesmen sometimes suffered such pain. The great biologist Charles Darwin, as a young man, a dropout of a medical college, struggling to decide what to study, what to be, what career to follow, was very rudely dismissed by his father as utterly undisciplined, useless, amounting to nothing. Then at the age of 22, quite unexpectedly, he happened to be on a ship, HMS Beagle, for 5 years, and his ideas revolutionized the world. Martin Luther King, who awoke a passionate dream of equality and justice for his people, falling in the footsteps of Mahatma Gandhi, was often whipped by his father for the slightest of reasons. He was lazy, he was useless. The pain he experienced was both physical and emotional, possibly preparing him for what he did and what became several years later. But not everyone comes through such pain and such suffering. It leaves many forever stunted, diminished, unfulfilled, alienated from themselves and from the world at large. A few years ago, in a forgiveness workshop, one 54-year-old woman, a grandmother, shared with us what she had never dared to share over 50 years. Engulfed in sobs and tears, haltingly, painfully, she spoke of what had happened to her 5 decades earlier, at the age of 4. She said she had been sexually assaulted repeatedly by her grandfather. He had been dead for 29 years. But she sobbed uncontrollably. I see him all the time, in every man, even in my son, in my husband. For me, every man is a rapist. Until now, I have never spoken a word about it for fear of humiliation. I have never forgiven him. I have never forgiven myself for keeping quiet. It was a hot summer day, but listening to her tangled suffering, a cold, slimy pain seized many a heart, obscuring any sense of life's warmth. For this woman, a grandmother, this dreadful memory of seething hurt and betrayal and the fear of being found out had inevitably traveled through the convoluted corridors of her memory for 50 years. And they would surely accompany her to her grave some 20, 30, 50 years hence, unless she learned how to break their spell and their power. But how? How do you forgive the dead? Who's responsible? Who's to be forgiven? How? And then, how do you learn to forgive yourself? And for what? How do you transform your own personal victimhood and instead become a savior of hundreds of others who are helpless victims of suffering, similar kind of suffering and traumas in their own family, in churches, in temples, in neighborhoods, in schools? This is how the yoga of forgiveness becomes so crucial, so necessary, as an essential step forward, not only in one's own redemption, but of many others, particularly of children. Childhood is indeed most precious. It is not for nothing that of all primates, the human childhood, even when it sometimes goes through traumas and convulsions, is the longest. It is during childhood that the seeds of our emotional, social, and spiritual being and identity begin to sprout and blossom. It is also the time when hurt and humiliation get embedded in our beings, sometimes inextricably. Sometimes we shed tears. Sometimes we suffer in silence. Rarely do we have the courage or sheer wherewithal to speak up and shout, "Me too." What does freedom mean for a growing child? The history of how children have been treated at home, in schools, in factories, in orphanages, and in churches and madrasas, the world over, need to be told, for it is a history that is so often filled with brutality, shame, abuse, and humiliation, and rarely with affection, care, and tenderness. Indeed, so many hurts we experience or hurts we inflict on each other occur during childhood. Such hurts continue to fester year after year, like pus, into adulthood, into old age, sometimes until the last breath of one's life. The freedom to live and to grow in peace and harmony for 2 billion children in the world under the age of 15 means freedom to be and to live unhampered by dogma and fear. The children are the sons and the daughters of life's longing for itself. Unless the freedom and harmony to be are safeguarded rigorously at every step and in every home, in every church, and in every temple, and in every institution, our true spiritual evolution will be a mere phantom, and the human journey will be forever stunted. The yoga of forgiveness starts for each one of us as individuals, but soon it bursts forth in many identities, as part of a family, of a profession, of a race and a nation, of history gone by, of a future being shaped, all begging to live anew, to be in certain harmony, all asking for forgiveness, an apology, an acknowledgement of hurt, sometimes brutal and calculated hurt, inflicted over decades and centuries, sometimes inflicted upon us, sometimes inflicted by us, even though we don't often accept it and deny it. And sometimes we ignore it and sweep it under the carpet and explain it away. In 1972, at the height of Vietnam War, there is one photograph of barbarism, of war, that shattered the conscience of the world in a manner never before or ever since. It was a picture of a 9-year-old girl, Kim, running naked down a country road in the village of Trang Bang, burning from a bath of gelid gasoline from an American napalm bombardment, with horror and utter desperation writ large on her scorched body that was to become forever a gnarled forest of scars. Quite miraculously, the 9-year-old girl survived. And then slowly and haltingly, again quite miraculously, entered into a new world of hope and forgiveness. Now an honored citizen of Canada and a goodwill ambassador for UNICEF, in 1996, at the age of 33, she met with John Plummer, the Vietnam veteran who had ordered the airstrike and had wrought such destruction on Kim and thousands of others, all of which he very painfully learnt from the picture and many others. Seething in pain and guilt in his new transformed persona as a minister of a church, for years John Plummer too had sought forgiveness from his victim and certain redemption. Kim publicly forgave him. She said, "Forgiveness made me free from hatred. I still have many scars on my body and severe pain most days, but my heart is cleansed. Napalm is very powerful, but faith, forgiveness, and love are much more powerful. We would not have war at all if everyone could learn how to live with true love, hope, and forgiveness. If that little girl in the picture can do it, ask yourself, can you? We can see how hurt, suffering, guilt, victimhood, and forgiveness play themselves out in 100 different situations and with 100 different actors. Every religious tradition and every culture in its state of compassion and grace has spoken of forgiveness as an expression of divinity. To err is human, to forgive is divine. Even though vengeance and retribution seem so often to be the driving force in the human history, yet another force, seemingly so feeble and so rare, of love and compassion, of nobility of heart and forgiveness, runs like a warm current in the icy torrents of life. It is this force, however much we may deny it, that gives meaning and substance to the idea of omnipotence and mercy of God. The great Russian poet, Yevgeny Yevtushenko, sensed this presence in 1941 at the age of 8 in the faces of war-ravaged women in Moscow as they came out to watch a march of 20,000 German prisoners. Each one of these women had lost a brother or a son or a husband to the Germans. The women saw the emaciated, blood-stained soldiers hobbling past on crutches or leaning on each other. Then I saw an elderly woman in broken-down boots push herself forward. She went up to the column, took from inside her coat something wrapped in a colorful handkerchief, and unfolded it. It was the crust of black bread. She pushed it awkwardly into the pocket of a soldier, so exhausted that he was tottering on his feet. And now suddenly from every side, women were running towards the soldiers, pushing into their hands bread, cigarettes, whatever they had. The soldiers were no longer enemies. They were people. They were human. How does one prepare oneself for such grace to emanate in the sordid depths of one's heart, often so filled with hurt and anger? How does a family or a community or nation prepare? On October 2, 2006, in one-room schoolhouse in the Old Order Amish community in Lancaster County, in the state of Pennsylvania in USA, a 32-year-old milk delivery man, Charles Carl Roberts, unleashed terror and devastation on one of the most simple and peace-loving people in America. Without any rhyme or reason known to anyone, Roberts held 10 girls, aged 6 to 13, hostage in the school. He killed 5 of them, execution style, before killing himself. Such school shootings, sadly, are not uncommon in the United States. The shooting in the Amish school was the 3rd in the country in less than a week. In 2006, it was the 24th school shooting in the United States, but with a very big difference. It was reported by the survivors that just before Roberts opened fire, 2 sisters, Marion and Barbie Fisher, 13 and 11, requested the assassin that they are shot first so that the others might be spared. Barbie was wounded while her older sister was killed. In the face of this gruesome devastation, what had struck a shocked nation was the amazing grace that had descended on the Amish community. The grandfather of one of the murdered Amish girls was heard warning the relatives on the day of shooting not to hate the killer, saying we must not think evil of this man. Another Amish father observed he had a mother and a wife and a soul, and now he's standing before a just God. An Amish neighbor visited and comforted the Roberts family hours after the shooting and extended forgiveness to them. One member after another of the Amish community visited and comforted Roberts' widow, parents and in-laws. One man held Roberts' sobbing father in his arms for more than an hour. More than 30 members of the Amish community attended Roberts' funeral, and Mary Roberts, the widow, was one of the few non-Amish outsiders invited to the funeral of one of the victims. The Amish compassion seemed to transcend all human frailties. The community set up a charitable trust fund for all three Roberts children. Not a word of anger or call for vengeance against Roberts or his family was ever uttered. There was no remorse to be expressed, no discussion about the existence of evil. On one fateful morning, life's harmony had been brutally and most wantonly interrupted. But life had to go on, without grudge, and with hope, and with amazing grace. A week after the tragedy, the West Nickel Mine School was demolished. 6 months later, a new school opened in another location, of a different design and architecture. It was called the New Hope School. What evil had possessed Roberts, one may ask, to wreak such havoc on the most innocent people? There is no way of knowing. After the tragedy, the Amish community had moved on its quiet and secluded world, stirring awe and wonder in a world so numbed by pervasive, senseless violence. A book, Amish Grace, How Forgiveness Transcended Tragedy, later made into a film, told the story of grace, not of a remarkable individual, but of a remarkable community, where each individual had been touched by special light, so utterly otherworldly, so illuminating. Lali mere lal ki, jit dekhun tit lal, lali dekhan main bhi ho gayi lal. The light of the divine is spread everywhere. When I reached out to touch it, I too became part of that light. How does one prepare oneself to such illumination, such light? How does a family or a community or a nation prepare? A 14th century textbook from India takes an analogy from the world of painting. Like the linen cloth on which the painting is made, the heart, the text suggests, must be first washed and cleansed thoroughly of impurities. It must then be primed, made properly smooth, for only upon such a surface can a clear outline be drawn. With the drawing completed, the last stage follows. The colors are filled in. Each one of us then fills in the colors in accordance with our own pratibha, our own hidden talent for grace. For we imbibe that talent from the words and inspiration of others. That is how the Amish must have been so imbued with a sense of hope and forgiveness. Hope, faith, love. Nothing worth doing is completed in our lifetime. Therefore, we must be saved by hope. Nothing true or beautiful or good makes complete sense in any immediate context of history. Therefore, we must be saved by faith. Nothing we do, however virtuous, can be accomplished alone. Therefore, we must be saved by love. Hope, faith, love, all soaked in the nectar of generosity and of forgiveness. Could these be the seeds in the ground of our being that bring forth the fruit of true freedom, of redemption, of certain nirvana, of moksha? In the 1990s, after the release of Nelson Mandela and the end of the apartheid in South Africa, the country had to face the meaning of vengeance and justice in a manner few nations had to face. Without memory, there is no healing, Archbishop Tutu, the chairman of Truth and Reconciliation Commission, observed. We remember so we can forgive. Without forgiveness, there is no future. Through this process, for the first time in the human history, South Africa said no to the reprisals and counter-reprisals that have been typical of all human conflicts. Forgiveness is not nebulous, unpractical, and idealistic, Tutu insisted. It is a thoroughly realistic, it is realpolitik in the long run. An apology is the first and necessary step towards acknowledgement and some healing, indeed towards freedom. Vox populi, vox Dei. The voice of people is the voice of God, and the voice is asking all of us to listen to the whispers and the cries in every hole, behind every wall. I too am human. On the banquet table of history, I too needed and demand a place of dignity. Whatever my color, whatever my race, whatever my gender, whatever my inadequacies, whatever my vulnerabilities, I'm human. The same light illuminates us all. Abli Allah noor paya, kudrati ke sab bande, ek noor se sab jagah upja, are kaun bhale aur kaun mande. From one light all has come to be. What is good? Who's bad? These are all phantoms of your own mind. This is the true and ever resonant mantra of the yoga of forgiveness. Shanti, shanti, shanti. Peace, peace, peace.